Hello and welcome to Justice. I'm Katie Pavlich in for Judge Janine Pirro. Thanks so much for being with us. Tonight, the latest on the 21 Christians brutally murdered by ISIS, the hunt to track down their killers, and what's being done to protect Christians in the Middle East. And another Obamacare blunder. This time, nearly 1 million Americans could have their tax returns delayed. But first, this week, the White House finally held their big Countering Violent Extremism Summit. But there seems to be a lot of meetings, and we know there were a lot of speeches, but there's one giant thing that was missing: any mention of Islamic extremism. Take a look.
Countering violent extremism begins with political, civic, and religious leaders rejecting sectarian strife. When people are oppressed and human rights are denied, particularly along sectarian lines or ethnic lines, when dissent is silenced, it feeds violent extremism. Obviously, there is a complicated history between the Middle East, the West, and none of us, I think, should be immune from criticism in terms of specific policies, but the notion that the West is at war with Islam is an ugly lie. And all of us, regardless of our faith, have a responsibility to reject it. So if we're serious about countering violent extremism, we have to get serious about confronting these economic grievances.
And with me now to discuss is Republican Congressman Lee Zeldin, who is a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming in on a snowy evening in New York. So my first question is, what was accomplished this week at this, what I've been calling the Generic Extremism Summit in Washington, D.C.?
Well, not much. I mean, Americans were looking for the president to execute a strategy to defeat radical Islamic extremism, and instead he's lecturing Americans. We're not looking for a professor. We want a commander-in-chief who's going to brilliantly execute a decisive strategy that is going to successfully defeat ISIS. I mean, it was a missed opportunity. This was another chance that the president could have shown strong leadership, American exceptionalism, committing to strong, decisive action to eliminate the threat. I mean, we have Americans right now who are saying they wish King Abdullah of Jordan was our president. President Obama needs to step up his game. It is incredibly important that we have troops right now. I'll be damned if we're going to send our troops over in harm's way and we don't have an effective strategy to win.
What do you make of the president essentially saying that the West is somehow to blame for what we're seeing with the Islamic extremism now playing across in Syria and Iraq and, of course, now into Northern Africa?
America has nothing to apologize for. And listen, you can't defeat ISIS if we have a president who's not willing to identify exactly what the threat is that we are up against. There's nothing to apologize for. Now is the time for him to articulate to Americans, showing leadership, showing the rest of the world, standing up with our allies to defeat an element that, if it continues to grow, I mean, December 7th, 1941 was a motivational moment in time that resulted us engaging in World War II. We do not have to wait for another moment in infamy before we decide to engage to identify radical Islamic extremism and to defeat it forcefully.
So clearly you think, and a lot of Americans think, based on polling, that the president isn't doing everything he can to keep Americans safe here at home. What do you think should have been addressed during the summit that wasn't, and how are we supposed to move forward, especially in Congress, with this issue?
I mean, the president should be talking less about poverty and talk more about his strategy that's going to result in a sleeping ISIS member being on the receiving end of a surefire, having one of those little red dots from one of those Navy SEAL rifles in the middle of the night. You know, we right now, ISIS, Iran, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, I mean, they're playing real-life war, and our president is playing the card game war. He needs one of those epiphanies where he has resolve and determination to actually annihilate the threat.
But what is going to be Congress's role in this? Because the president has come to Congress, the Senate and the House, and asked for military authorization, and it seems like Republicans and Democrats are on two different sides of the issue now. So what is Congress specifically going to do what maybe President Obama is not?
I'm happy that the president came to Congress asking for the authorization for the use of force. We have some important questions questions that not only us, but our constituents are interested in knowing. How many troops? What are their skill sets? Who is in charge? Is that person in charge going to be given the flexibility and resources they need to accomplish the mission? In the authorization, it says the president should be able to do everything that's necessary and appropriate. What is necessary and appropriate to this president? We want to know his strategy because we don't want to send our troops overseas if they're not going to win.
Well, certainly the American people also want both the president and Congress to come up with a solution to this problem, which is growing by the day. Congressman, thank you so much for being here today. And growing outrage tonight after a CENTCOM official publicly released specific details of future war plans against ISIS. Senator John McCain, chairman of the Senate Armed Forces Services Committee, tweeted out today, quote, "Now we tell them the enemy when, where, and with what forces we will attack them." Unbelievable. Retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer joins me now. Colonel Shaffer, what is your reaction to this?
This is Keystone Cops level mistakes. I mean, you don't, I don't remember Winston Churchill calling Adolf Hitler saying, "Hey, you know that Atlantic Wall, we're about to breach it. You better get ready." This is bad on all levels. We have to focus, Katie, on how to go about stating intentions. That's great. We want to do certain things in the war. You don't say we're coming from with 25,000 troops within this time frame and we want to be done by Ramadan. It's totally insane. It gives the enemy total ability to get there ahead of you. Right now we're seeing along Route Tampa, the main resupply line between Kuwait and Baghdad, IEDs that we've never seen before. These guys are already ahead of us, plus the forces we're trying to train, the Iraqi regulars, are not going to be ready. You have on a daily basis the Sunni and Shia elements of those military fighting each other. We're being referees. So we're not going to be ready for prime time in 6 weeks, and it's insane now we're saying this in such a way that will almost ensure failure.
Now, Colonel, my question now is that now that these plans have been published, we're looking at doing something. But taking back Mosul is not a small defeat. It's a huge city. What is it going to take to actually get that job done?
Well, it's going to take essentially three parts, a three-part plan. First, you have to essentially isolate the city to make sure ISIS can't get resupplied. Secondly, you have to then take special operations forces to start determining specific targets inside to make sure that we hit the right things, don't hit civilians. And third, you have to use a decisive military force that's cohesive, that's trained in urban warfare. Our best troops, it takes a long time, Katie, to put together an urban warfare unit. The Marines have done this. They had to take several cities a couple different times. I don't think we're going to be able to do this with the Iraqis. I'm not saying we shouldn't take an Arab force and do it, but I'm saying it's going to take a lot more than 6 weeks to get them ready to go for this.
And now switching gears to North Africa, there is a report out now showing that ISIS plans to invade Europe through North Africa, and I stress the word invade to the viewers because we're not talking about sending a couple fighters in here and there. They're talking about a full-scale invasion. How realistic is that, and is ISIS really at the point where they can pull something like that off?
No, but if we don't stop them now, they're moving in that direction. Three things are going to have to be available to them. First, they have to have a nation-state level infrastructure to do this. They have to have logistics, they have command and control. They have to be able to sustain their forces, train them, and project them. Projection is a tricky thing. The Chinese really can't even do force projection yet, that they're a huge country. But what I'm saying, Katie, is that you have to be concerned by the fact that we have done nothing to deter them so far. President al-Sisi has been using the Egyptian military very effectively to go in there. We need to really back up al-Sisi. The London Center for Policy Research, where I belong to, has a policy recommendation regarding this region to include al-Sisi, to include Iraq, which actually allows for, as the Congressman was talking about, a real strategy to be put forth to go after this. The ISIS folks in Libya have to be defeated. They have to be taken seriously. Can they invade the Pope and the Italians yet? No. But they're on the path, and unless we do something now, within a few years, they'll have that capability.
And we do have some actually a comment from the Egyptian ambassador who said similar things to the Egyptian president. Let's take a listen to that real quickly.
Sure.
We are determined to confront these people. We are not going to allow them to take control over our region. Egypt considers itself to be the bulwark against these extremists, and we take our role seriously. But now, these 21 people, these 21 Egyptians who were slaughtered in Libya, that should be a wake-up call to us all. The international community needs to show resolve And that has to happen today, not in 6 months' time.
Colonel, is it going to be a wake-up call, or are we going to see them progress more as we move forward?
He is absolutely correct. Let me be clear. The Egyptians can prevent Libya from falling further into chaos. We need to get behind them. Just like the Kurds need to be the ones we partner with to go into Mosul. We have allies, Katie. It's just the president doesn't like the allies we have. He wants to kind of swag off and do something else. So it's time you let the generals do their job to plan real military operations with our partners in the region, rather than having this policy of wishful thinking, which was on in full display in this so-called White House meeting to prevent Islamic extremism. It's totally insane.
Absolutely. Well, Colonel Schaefer, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Sure.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you,
And
Kate.
now new questions surrounding 3 schoolgirls from the UK who boarded a flight to Turkey in what's believed to be a common flight path towards ISIS in Syria. These images are from Gatwick Airport, just outside London. The girls, 2 of whom are 15, the other 16, all attend the same school in East London. But apparently, no one at the airport questioned why the 3 young girls were traveling without any adult supervision to Turkey and possibly Syria. And earlier today, the parents of these young girls sent out pleas on social media for them to come home, and Prime Minister David Cameron also voiced his concern.
Well, it is deeply concerning, and obviously our authorities will do everything we can to help these girls, but it does make a broader point, which is the fight against Islamist extremist terror is not just one that we can wage by the police and border control. It needs every school, every university, every college, every community to recognize they have a role to play. We all have a role to play in stopping people from having their minds poisoned by this appalling death cult.
And with me now, terrorism analyst and Fox News contributor Lisa Daftari. Lisa, thanks so much for coming in tonight.
Pleasure.
First, let's talk about these 3 girls. How did these authorities actually find out that they were gone and missing and on their way to Turkey and probably ultimately Syria?
Their parents actually alerted authorities when they realized that they said they were going to school and they actually didn't come home, and that's where they were going. They're still believed to be in Turkey and have not yet crossed over into ISIS territory, into Syria, and authorities are obviously they know that time is of the essence because it's much easier to find them in Turkey rather than wait until they are in Syria.
How is it that these young women who aren't even legal adults yet are able to get on an airplane flight at a time when we're watching ISIS closely and even get to Turkey without going unnoticed, essentially?
Right, absolutely. And this is something that obviously the ISIS is masterful at doing, recruiting, radicalizing, luring these young women, which is now their target group, young women from the West, to go over there, to become ISIS brides, to become ISIS girlfriends, to either be sold for a profit or to actually become part of this growing caliphate. They want ISIS wives, husbands, babies, families. They want to grow the caliphate.
I have seen that there are at least 50 women from the UK who have gone to be wives of ISIS fighters. I've also seen that 1 in 6 the recruits that ISIS is taking are women. I mean, this is a huge number, but what is the actual reality for these women once they get over? Because as you said, ISIS puts up this really appealing way of living in Syria, but in reality it's much different.
Right, so they promise this Islamic utopia. They go over there and they realize Sharia law reality. And what happens is it's very difficult once they are there to come back because they're an asset for ISIS. Again, not only are they wives and serve as sex slaves or what have you, but now they have Western passports in their possession. So it's very difficult once they get there. And we see both scenarios play out. Some act as a platform then, becoming a propaganda tool and asking other women to come serve your religion, come join ISIS, and others who are absolutely regretful.
Yeah, well, I want to switch gears a little bit here. We've talked about women and other fighters going to Syria, but now the concern is that Syrian refugees actually being invited to the United States to seek asylum. What can you tell us about that?
Right, this is an absolute mistake. We've already seen the fallout from letting these refugees come, whether it's in Europe or right here in the United States in the aftermath of 9/11 or the Boston Marathon bombing. Look, we are a nation, we have heart, we want to let these refugees in. A lot of them are well-intentioned, a lot of them are religious minorities, they're Christians. We want to let them in. But at what cost? When we do not have the proper apparatus to vet these individuals, then who are we to let them in and then take a risk at that? The irony in all of this is that the reason this administration did not get involved in the Syrian civil war is that we said we could not figure out who the good guys and the bad guys were. Now, are we going to take a chance and let those bad guys in with the good guys here in this country?
Well, what is that? That's my question, is what is the vetting process that they actually have set up? I know that there's been a lot of criticism of the amount of students we've let in from Saudi Arabia because they overstay their visas, and there's thousands of students now lost in the system who we haven't followed up on. And now we're seeing this refugee crisis, which is 4 million people, and it doesn't seem like they can even handle that large of a number, unfortunately.
No, we cannot, and we don't have the apparatus on the ground in Syria in terms of getting intel. Again, remember the red line and how we drew it and how we couldn't get involved because we just did not have the proper intel. And again, we've already seen the fallout from letting these types of individuals in. We have to take a step back and say, as much as we want to be the nation that provides haven for these unfortunate cases, at the same time, we prioritize national security. And that's the bottom line.
Absolutely. National security for the United States comes first. Lisa,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate it. And coming up, the latest on the 21 Coptic Christians brutally murdered by ISIS. What's being done to bring their killers to justice? And tell us what you think on Facebook and Twitter at Judge Jeanine #JusticeOnFox.